Did you know there are beach towns in America where you can buy a house for less than the cost of a used car? We're talking waterfront living, ocean breezes, and real community for under $150,000. Here's the thing most people don't realize. While everyone's fighting over overpriced condos in Miami and Naples, there are 15 forgotten coastal gems sitting quietly along American shorelines, where homes are still absurdly affordable, the beaches are still wild and uncrowded, and the locals actually want you to stay. And not a single one of them is in Florida. Today on Life in the State, we're diving into 15 forgotten beach towns where homes still cost under $150,000. We compiled this list by cross-referencing Zillow median home price data, U.S. Census coastal designations, and real estate market reports from 2023 to 2024, focusing specifically on towns with direct coastal access, populations under 25,000, and median home prices at or below that $150,000 mark. These aren't abandoned ghost towns. These are real, breathing communities with history, culture, and some of the most underrated coastline in the entire country. Let's get into it. If you've ever dreamed of living near the water without draining your life savings, smash that subscribe button right now. We find the hidden places most travel channels completely ignore. You don't want to miss what's coming up on this list. Number 15, Waveland, Mississippi. Most people don't realize that Mississippi even has a beach. But Waveland sits right on the Gulf Coast, tucked along the shoreline of the Mississippi Sound, and the median home price here hovers right around $130,000. Here's the wild part. Waveland was nearly wiped off the map by Hurricane Katrina in 2005. The storm surge that hit this town was the highest ever recorded in U.S. history, over 34 feet. That's taller than a 3-story building, swallowing everything in its path. But what nobody talks about is what happened next. The people of Waveland came back. They rebuilt, slowly and stubbornly, and the town that emerged is quieter, tighter-knit, and deeply underrated. Property values never fully recovered to pre-storm peaks, which, for a buyer today, is actually an opportunity hiding inside a tragedy. The beach here is calm, the cost of living is among the lowest on the Gulf, and the community has the kind of grit you just don't find in manufactured resort towns. Number 14, Bay St. Louis, Mississippi. Stay on the Mississippi Gulf Coast just a little longer, because Bay St. Louis deserves its own spotlight. This town of roughly 13,000 people has been quietly attracting artists, retirees, and remote workers for years. The median home price sits around $140,000, and for that, you get a charming historic downtown, an active art scene, and direct access to the Bay of St. Louis where the water meets the horizon in every direction. What makes Bay St. Louis strange and irresistible at the same time is the contrast. You've got a century-old Catholic church next to a trendy coffee shop. You've got shrimpers launching boats at dawn while painters set up easels at the seawall by 9 a.m. It's the kind of town that feels like it belongs in a novel, not a real estate listing. Number 13, Pritchard, Alabama. Alabama's coastline is a hidden gem, and Pritchard sits in Mobile County, just minutes from Mobile Bay. Median home prices here dip as low as $90,000, which, in a coastal state, is almost impossible to believe. Now here's the context that matters. Pritchard has faced serious economic headwinds for decades. Population has declined, and the city has struggled with budget constraints. But that same economic pressure has kept property values accessible in a way that most American coastal communities haven't seen since the 1980s. For the buyer who's willing to invest in a community that's actively rebuilding its identity, Pritchard represents something rare, genuine affordability within striking distance of some of the most underappreciated waterways in the Deep South. Mobile Bay, by the way, is one of the most biologically diverse estuaries in North America. The fishing alone draws people from 5 states. Number 12, Tarboro area / Washington, North Carolina. Pull up a map of North Carolina, and most people zoom straight to the Outer Banks, where home prices now average well over $500,000. But drift inland along the Pamlico River, and you'll find the town of Washington, North Carolina, often called the original Washington because it was the first American city named after George Washington back in 1776. Median home prices here sit around $120,000, and the town sits directly on the Pamlico River waterway that feeds into the Pamlico Sound and eventually the Atlantic. Here's what's wild. This town predates the nation itself. Walking through its historic district feels like flipping through the early pages of American history, except you can actually afford to live there. The waterfront is quiet, the community is proud, and the pace of life is something most coastal tourists completely miss because they're racing to the Outer Banks. Number 11, Chincoteague, Virginia. Yes, Chincoteague, home of the famous wild ponies. Every year, The wild horses of Assateague Island are rounded up and made to swim across the Assateague Channel in one of the most bizarre and beloved American traditions still practiced today. Thousands of people watch. The ponies have been doing this since at least the 1920s. And yet, median home prices in Chincoteague sit around $145,000. For a barrier island town with a nationally known wildlife refuge, that number is almost absurd. The catch? Chincoteague is remote. It's tucked in the far eastern corner of Virginia's eastern shore, and getting there requires commitment. But for buyers who want a true island lifestyle, wild, quiet, and genuinely untouched, Chincoteague is the kind of place that gets under your skin and never fully lets go. Number 10. Ocean Springs, Mississippi. Honorable mention return. We're going back to Mississippi because this state keeps showing up on this list for a reason. Ocean Springs sits across a bridge from Biloxi, but the two towns couldn't feel more different. Biloxi has the casinos, the noise, the crowds. Ocean Springs has oak-canopied streets, local galleries, and a downtown that feels genuinely preserved rather than performed. Median home prices, around $135,000. What nobody talks about is the legacy of Walter Anderson, an artist who spent years painting the wildlife of the Gulf Coast Islands in near-complete solitude. His work now hangs in the town's community center, and walking through it feels like discovering a secret that the rest of the art world somehow overlooked. That's Ocean Springs in a nutshell. Quietly extraordinary. You're halfway through this list, and we haven't even hit the strangest entries yet. If this content is opening your eyes to places you never knew existed, drop a comment right now with the number of the town that surprised you most. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Number 9. Port Lavaca, Texas. Texas has over 350 miles of Gulf Coast shoreline, and most people only know about Galveston. But Port Lavaca sits on Matagorda Bay, a deep, wide estuary that connects to the Gulf, and median home prices here are sitting around $115,000. Here's the geographical context that makes this town so interesting. Matagorda Bay is one of the largest bays on the Texas coast, stretching over 50 miles long. It was the site of one of the most harrowing failed colonial expeditions in North American history. When Robert Cavalier, Sieur de La Salle, sailed into this bay in 1685 thinking he'd found the mouth of the Mississippi River. He was about 400 miles off. His ships wrecked. His colony fell apart. He was eventually murdered by his own men in the Texas wilderness. The bay that swallowed La Salle's dreams is now one of the most productive fishing grounds on the Gulf Coast. Port Lavaca locals catch redfish and flounder right off the city pier, free and open to the public. Number 8. Dauphin Island, Alabama. Here's a place that feels like it shouldn't exist at the price it does. Dauphin Island sits at the mouth of Mobile Bay, a barrier island about 14 miles long and barely a mile wide in places. It's the kind of island that looks fragile on a map, because it is. Hurricanes have reshaped it multiple times. Ivan, Katrina, Sally. The western end of the island has been battered so many times that some sections look post-apocalyptic. Empty lots, exposed foundations, wild vegetation reclaiming the land. And yet, median home prices hover around $130,000 to $145,000 depending on the section of the island. The bird life here is extraordinary. Dauphin Island is one of the top bird-watching destinations in the entire country. During spring migration, the island is a landfall point for neotropical birds crossing the Gulf of Mexico, exhausted warblers and tanagers dropping from the sky into the trees. Birdwatchers travel from across the continent for it. If you're the kind of person who finds meaning in wild, unscripted nature, this island has a pull that's genuinely hard to explain. Number 7. Eastport, Maine. Let's talk about the other end of the country. Eastport, Maine is the easternmost city in the United States. Every single morning, it's the first American city to see the sunrise. That alone should make it famous. Instead, it has a population of barely 1,300 people and median home prices around $120,000. Here's what makes Eastport genuinely strange. It sits on Moose Island in Cobscook Bay, a region with some of the most dramatic tidal changes in the entire Western Hemisphere. The tides here swing up to 28 feet between high and low. That's nearly 3 stories of water rising and falling twice a day. Boats that are floating at high tide are sitting in mud at low. The town has a sardine canning history that once made it one of the most productive small ports on the East Coast. Those canneries are mostly gone now, replaced by a quiet arts community, a handful of restaurants, and an almost eerie sense of being at the edge of everything. If you want to live somewhere that feels like the beginning of the world or the end of it, Eastport is waiting. Number 6. Hoquiam, Washington. The Pacific Northwest coast is one of the wildest, most dramatic shorelines in North America. and Hoquiam sits right along Grays Harbor on the Washington coast, where median home prices hover around $140,000. Most people don't realize that Grays Harbor is named after Captain Robert Gray, the same American sea captain who discovered the Columbia River in 1792. Gray sailed into this harbor just weeks before entering the Columbia, and both discoveries reshaped American territorial claims to the entire Pacific Northwest. Hoquiam itself was once a major timber town, and the architecture reflects that boom-era confidence. Grand Victorian homes built by lumber barons sitting alongside working-class neighborhoods that never got the Instagram treatment. The coastline nearby is raw and untamed in a way that the Oregon and California coasts, now crawling with tourists, simply aren't anymore. Ocean Shores is minutes away. The razor clam digging is legendary. And on a clear day, the light over Grays Harbor turns the water a shade of silver that doesn't look real. Number 5. Biloxi adjacent. Pass Christian, Mississippi. Mississippi earns another slot, and this one surprises people every time. Pass Christian, locals pronounce it Pass Christian, sits on the Mississippi Sound between Gulfport and Bay St. Louis. It's one of the oldest settlements on the Gulf Coast, with a history dating back to French colonial rule in the early 1700s. Median home prices, around $130,000. What nobody talks about is that Pass Christian once hosted some of the grandest antebellum estates on the Gulf Coast. Presidents vacationed here. The beachfront boulevard was lined with live oaks draped in Spanish moss, and the town was considered the Newport of the South. Katrina devastated it. But the bones of the town survived, and what's being rebuilt has a deliberate, thoughtful quality. Residents who chose to come back, not just those who never left. The beach here is clean, the water is calm, and the live oaks that survived still line the boulevard like guardians of something that refuses to disappear. Number 4. Cape Charles, Virginia. Here's a town that genuinely feels like time travel. Cape Charles sits at the southern tip of Virginia's eastern shore, a narrow peninsula between the Chesapeake Bay and the Atlantic Ocean. To get to the rest of Virginia from here, you either take the 17-mile Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel, one of the longest bridge tunnel complexes in the world, or you don't go at all. That isolation kept Cape Charles frozen. And the result is a town with one of the most intact Victorian and colonial revival downtown districts on the entire East Coast. 6 square blocks of historic homes, many of them under $150,000, because for decades nobody outside the Eastern Shore knew they existed. The town was built in 1884 as the southern terminus of the New York, Philadelphia, and Norfolk Railroad. Ferries connected trains to the Virginia mainland across the bay. When the bridge tunnel opened in 1964, the railroad era ended, and Cape Charles quietly slipped out of history. What remained is a gift. Sunsets over the Chesapeake Bay from Cape Charles Beach are the kind that make you stop mid-sentence. The water is calm, the streets are quiet, and the homes are extraordinary for the price. Number 3. Gloucester, Virginia, Gloucester Point. On the western shore of the York River, where it meets the Chesapeake Bay, sits Gloucester County, and specifically the area around Gloucester Point, where coastal properties still regularly appear under $145,000. Here's the historical weight of this place. Gloucester Point sits directly across the York River from Yorktown, the site of the final major battle of the American Revolution in 1781. When Cornwallis surrendered, the defeat was visible from this shoreline. The birth of American independence was essentially announced across this water. The area is also one of the top blue crab harvesting regions on the Chesapeake Bay, a fishery that has defined this coastline for centuries and still shapes the local economy today. It's the kind of place where history isn't in a museum. It's in the water, in the work, and in the way people still talk about the bay like it's a living thing. Because it is. Number 2. Rockport, Texas. Before you get to the most surprising entry on this list, Rockport deserves a genuine look. Rockport sits on Aransas Bay on the Texas Gulf Coast, and it holds 2 things you wouldn't expect to find together. Median home prices around $140,000 to $150,000, and the winter home of the endangered whooping crane. The Aransas National Wildlife Refuge just south of Rockport is the only place in the world where wild whooping cranes, the tallest birds in North America, spend their winters. There are fewer than 600 of them left in existence. Every single one of them migrates from Canada each fall and lands within a few miles of this small Texas town. Rockport was also severely damaged by Hurricane Harvey in 2017. And like so many towns on this list, the rebuilding has been slow, uneven, and deeply human. The art colony that made Rockport famous in Texas, its galleries and sculpture gardens, is gradually coming back. For a nature lover or a birder, Rockport might be the most quietly extraordinary place on this entire list. Number 1. McHenry, Mississippi, Stone County coastal access. The number one spot goes somewhere almost no one expects. Mississippi's Stone County sits inland from the Gulf, but within 45 minutes of the coast, and median home prices in the McHenry area drop as low as $85,000 to $100,000 for homes with land, trees, and genuine quiet. Here's the thing. The Pearl River runs through this region and connects to the Gulf of Mexico, giving residents a water connection that most people never think about. The DeSoto National Forest covers massive sections of Stone County, 500,000 acres of longleaf pine and hardwood forest that gives this corner of Mississippi a wildness that feels prehistoric. What nobody talks about is that this region sits within the ancient homeland of the Choctaw Nation, one of the largest Native American tribes in the Southeast before forced removal in the 1830s. The landscape here carries that history in ways that don't make the tourist brochures. For under $100,000, you can own a piece of genuinely wild American land within driving distance of the Gulf Coast, surrounded by national forest, river access, and the kind of stillness that reminds you the country is still larger than most of us remember. Here's the truth that this entire list keeps pointing back to. America is still full of places that haven't been discovered by the algorithm, the influencers, or the investors. Towns that were built by real industries, fishing, timber, rail, agriculture, and that are still standing, still breathing, still waiting. The coasts of Mississippi, Alabama, Virginia, Maine, Washington, and Texas are hiding affordable waterfront lives that most people assumed disappeared 20 years ago. They didn't. They just got quiet. While we've done our best to compile accurate median home price data from publicly available real estate sources, markets move and conditions change. These numbers reflect general trends as of 2023 to 2024. Always do your own research and, better yet, go visit these places yourself. No list replaces standing at a seawall and deciding if a town feels like home. Now here's your question, and I want to see the answers in the comments. Which of these 15 towns surprised you the most? Or, do you already live in one of these places? Tell us what it's actually like down below. Real people, real answers. And if this video showed you something you didn't know existed, subscribe to Life in the State. Every week we go deeper into the hidden geography of America. The places that don't make the headlines, but absolutely deserve to. We'll see you in the next one.